So we are continuing with the same topic of LLM and hallucinations. So I would like to invite to the stage Professor Mor Pipek from Blavatnik School of Computer Science from Tel Aviv University, visiting researchers at Google Research. So the stage is for you.
Large language models are an amazing technology, but it's also unreliable technology. Let's say we prompt a model with this prompt to generate a biography of Elsa Pataki. Then models are likely to generate a very informative paragraph, but some of the claims in the paragraph will be factually incorrect. So to overcome this problem, usually what people do is to take the generated paragraph and claims, and then for each claim, check whether it's consistent with external evidence, let's say from Wikipedia. Another very common approach is to take the generated claim and let the model generate more claims, and then check whether the model is consistent across these claims. Right, so in this talk, I would like to take a step back and actually ask, well, what are hallucinations for the language model itself? Why do they happen? When do they happen? I will present two works we just published from the NLP group at Tel Aviv University. The first one will be about viewing hallucinations as a fallback behavior that language models exhibit under uncertainty. And the second work is about predicting how factual a language model will be about a given subject before it actually generates any text. All right, so starting from the first work, it was led by Mor Pipek together with Ori Yoran and Jonathan Berendt here at Tel Aviv University. So in this work, we took a broader perspective and we viewed hallucinations as just one of different undesirable behaviors that language models exhibit. Specifically, we looked at the case of the generate text that includes a lot of repetitions in it, up to complete repetitions of the exact same sequence again and again. So this example is from GPT-3 Da Vinci, now it's already deprecated. And here's a more recent example from GitHub's Copilot. So Maor, during working on our project, worked also on a draft, paper draft. This is in LaTeX, and we can see that Copilot suggested many repetitive comments. So I think we should keep it here. I think we should keep it here. I think we should keep it here. So definitely not something that we would want from language model. Okay, so basically what we propose in this work is to view all these behaviors of sequence repetitions, the generate text, and hallucinations as different fallback behaviors that language models exhibit under uncertainty. And we wanted to study the connection between these behaviors and maybe learn something about hallucinations. Right, so to do this, we used a controlled setting where we prompted models with list questions. So questions where the answer is a list of items. For example, the following 25 magna were drawn by Ryohei Kagami, right? And so models generally struggle with such queries because they require recalling a lot of factual information. So it pushes them to uncertainty. Another variant of this task that we evaluated is a very simple list questions, but where we ask the model to generate more answers than actually exist. So for example, giving us 25 colors in the Olympic rings, while in reality, there are just 5 colors. And the last setting we considered is more natural and open-ended, where we ask models to generate biographies of people. Great, so we took a list of models and then we prompted them with these queries and we got the answers, and then we classified the answers as either correct, hallucinations, or repetitions, or other categories that are not important now. And what we see here is one plot of results. So the y-axis shows the average number of answers for each category, and the x-axis shows the model size, right? So the number of parameters of the model. And so one quick thing we can see here, which is kind of expected, if you look at the green bars, so as models become larger, they generate more correct answers. This is expected because language models, as they become larger, they know more things, they capture more knowledge. But a more interesting trend I would like you to see is the trade-off between the orange bars and the blue bars for hallucinations and repetitions. What we basically see here is that as models become larger, they sort of like shift between generating many repetitions to generating less repetitions and more hallucinations. This is a similar graph, but instead of looking at model size, we look at the number of tokens used to train the model. So basically, we took a specific model and we looked at different checkpoints during training, and we did the same analysis, right? And we know that as we train models more, then it generally makes them better. But then what we see here is exactly the same trend as before. As models train more, they shift from generating repetitions to generating more hallucinations. This is the third and last graph I'm going to show for this analysis. And this is where we compare models trained before and after instruction tuning. So actually, as Jonathan explained in the previous talk, so a typical practice today is to take a pre-trained language model and then apply this extra step of instruction tuning so the model can follow instructions. So what we see here is that this extra step of instruction tuning, well, it almost eliminates repetitions, as you see the small blue bars for repetitions, but it increases hallucinations dramatically. So we saw the same trend again and again across different models, across different tasks, also the natural biographies generation. And actually, even if we just take a single model and we try to use different decoding schemes, right, to sample either with increasing temperature, for example, so we see the same trend. Perhaps even more interesting finding is that even if we just look at a single generation, right, if we just feed the model a specific prompt and we looked at the outputs, right, and we do the same analysis, what we basically see is that when they generate such answers, they start by generating the correct facts, so the facts that they know, and then they gradually shift to hallucinations, and then to somewhat repetitive text, and finally complete sequence repetitions. So to sum up this part, we see this very clear and consistent trend that as models become better, let it be because of more training, more parameters, and so on, they sort of shift from this very basic, simple fallback behavior of generating repetitions to the more complex end of hallucinating. And in the other way around, if we increase uncertainty, right, so if we think about the single generation example, as models become more uncertain, they fall back in the other way around. They start from the more complex behavior of hallucinations and then fall back to the very basic scenario of repetitions. Right, and so the key takeaway here is that hallucinations can be viewed as a sort of a evolved or an advanced form of fallback that models exhibit when they are uncertain. But okay, so what exactly this means, right? So essentially, we train models more and do everything I just described because it gives better performance. It makes models better. But we do pay. We do pay in the sense that we get more hallucinations, which are much harder to detect than repetitions. But the good news is that, well, now we know that all these behaviors, they stem from the same underlying cause. Models just become uncertain, and then they exhibit these behaviors. And so this begs the question, can we predict for which inputs the model will be uncertain? And so this is the question that we tackled in the next work I'm going to present, led by my student, Daniela Gottsman. So here we asked, well, can we estimate how knowledgeable a model is about a certain entity or subject just by observing how it processes the name of that entity? So without generating actually any text, before the model generates, can we estimate how knowledgeable the model is about that entity? And an interesting analogy here is to nonverbal communication. So we humans, we're not only communicating through language. We also have body language and facial expressions. Sometimes we can even say if someone is about to lie only by before it actually says anything. So following this intuition, we tried to do the following, to tackle the following problem. So given some entity, let's say Napoleon, we feed it to the model, just the name of that person or entity, right? And then we observe what's going on through the computation. I will explain this in a bit, but we basically look how the model processes, how the computation looks like when we feed in Napoleon through the network. And then just based on that, we try to predict two things. First, we try to predict how accurate the model would have been if we would have let it answer a lot of questions about Napoleon. Right, so if we would have asked the model where Napoleon was born, when he was born, and so on, the model would have shown some accuracy. Can we estimate this in advance? The second metric is about factuality. So if we would have let the model generate a paragraph about Napoleon, can we estimate how factual, how many claims in that paragraph would have been factual in this response? Again, before the response actually generated. Someone has a call. Great. So this is super hard, right? How can we even do it? And to do it, we took inspiration from recent interpretability works that basically showed two interesting findings. When we feed in names, right, like Napoleon, during the computation, the model constructs a very information-rich representation of that entity. So for example, we could locate a specific vector in the computation that encodes a lot of attributes about Napoleon, like France and wars and whatnot. The second finding is that these attributes are easily extractable. We can decode these attributes from that vector using simple linear functions. And so we built on top of these findings and presented a new method that we called KEEN for knowledge estimation of entities. And basically, the idea is that we trained a simple probe, so small neural model on top of these representations to do this, to predict exactly the quantities I just described, the accuracy and factuality. Right, so given a subject, we feed it to the model, and then we have this neural small model that predicts how accurate or factual the model will be. Right, and so we estimated the performance of KEEN against standards measures for factuality and question answering accuracy. So results for factuality are on the left plot and for accuracy are on the right plot. And so the y-axis showed our score, KEEN score, and the x-axis showed the metrics for factuality and accuracy. So a perfect predictor is the green line, and KEEN is the red line. And basically what we see in both cases is a very high correlation between the scores. So this shows overall that KEEN well estimates how knowledgeable the model is about the given subject. So we trained KEEN for these very specific objectives, but actually we discovered that it correlates with many other behaviors of the model. So for example, models today are trained to hedge or to abstain from answering when they don't know the answer. I'm sure some of you encountered the case where you prompted the model with some question and then the model's like, oh, I'm just a language model. I was trained until some cutoff 2 years ago. I don't know the answer. So what we discovered is that as models hedge more, right, so our score becomes lower, right? So indicating that the model is not knowledgeable about that entity. We can predict also how the hedging fraction of the model for a given subject. And finally, we also saw that if we train a model on a specific subject, the KEEN score for that subject is being adjusted like automatically without any further training. So it also captures changes in the model's knowledge after fine-tuning. All right, so to wrap up, the key takeaways are, well, hallucinations can be viewed as a more advanced or evolved form of fallback behaviors of language models when they are uncertain. We also saw that as uncertainty increases for the model, it shifts from the more sophisticated behavior of hallucinations to the basic old school, in a sense, behavior of repetitions. And finally, we saw that it's also possible to estimate how knowledgeable a model is about a given subject, even before it generates anything, just by observing its internal computation. Thank you.
Okay, we have now Q&A. The mic.
Very impressive work. Thank you very much. I want to ask you, so there's different stages of the encoding or embedding of the word for Napoleon, let's say, in different stages of the model. Did you see different results for the different stages, like different behaviors?
This is a this is a good question. So we didn't really test it in this work, but from the works that we built on, we know that the processing is gradual. So in the early layers, this is the stage where the representation of the subject is being constructed, and then it's gradually improved. So if we would have do this early on, I would assume it won't work as good. So yeah, we chose specific layers based on previous work, but it will be interesting to check.
Hi, I'm coming from the creative side of using AI, and I actually see and use hallucination as a creative capability of AI. And I'm when I'm working with models like ChatGPT 4 now 4.0, which is more made to respond to what we consider as true and things like this, I'm losing its creative ability. It's a little bit like a child, the child make up stories based on the logic of understanding the world, but he doesn't have the information. So it's almost like the tendency going toward killing that imagination, that creativity, for it to be more scientific, reliable, and such. And I think there is a way to keep both. In the minute we identify it as a creativity factor and we allow it to keep it for certain things, it would be very important.
Thank you for the comment. I think it's more of a comment, right?
Yeah. I have a question. So you showed this work for entities, for concrete entities or people, whatever. What about more abstract notions?
Sorry, like the sound is not great. Maybe you asked.
Okay, so my question is there similar work for more abstract notions?
For example?
For example, sentiment, for example, whether, there was a struggle, a debate, or, things like that.
Yeah. So there are definitely other works. It's also like becoming somewhat popular now to try and estimate. It's not exactly estimate, but to see what kind of information or properties are encoded in the representation of models. So yeah, I just saw yesterday work about sentiment, like measuring the sentiment from the internal representation. So yeah, there are definitely such works.
Last question here.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. I was wondering whether there's a correlation between Keen's performance in detecting hallucinations, or at least how much the model knows about a certain topic or entity, and whether humans would be able to detect that the model hallucinates or just making up things.
You mean if a human could predict if the model is going to hallucinate?
Yeah, whether there's any correlation between the internal representation as detected by Keen and humans' ability to see whether the output contains hallucinations.
Okay, so we haven't checked that. We just checked that with a standard factuality score, but that's an interesting question. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So maybe next time you can come on the stage also to talk about this. We'll take your name. So Professor Mor, really amazing. Thank you very much. Really fascinating.